Hello. Is this thing on? We're on the internet, and it is Thursday. This is my friend, not Matt Williams. I just realized I didn't change that. Matt's in chat today. Nirmal is on the show, and I'm going to change that right now because that is a fail on my part.
I have big shoes to fill today if Matt Williams' name is underneath me. How's everyone doing today?
We've got some people in chat, and in case this is the first time you're watching our show, we do this live every Thursday. Oh, and great. For like 5 years now, when the episode number's on the thing, 230 something is the episode. So that's how many weeks. And in case this is your first time here, welcome to the live. If you're not watching it live, you should come back on Thursdays and join us. In fact, the links, there's a bunch of links below. All the links below will help you make sure that you're never missing this show live. And we have a lot of stuff that supports this show. Like there's a podcast that comes out of it. So in case you didn't know, there's a link below. It takes you to the podcast. I will show you. And you can check out this podcast. It's just podcast.bretfisher.com. And you can listen to the edited down version that takes out all of my stutters and ums and has all the wonderful guest quotes that we're all here for. And
you don't have too many of those, Bret.
A little. I'm getting better. I'm practicing. By the way, we also have a Discord server. 14,000 DevOps professionals right there, devops.fan. You can join for free. And in fact, you can see this cool little events thing where you can also see all of our future events. We have stuff going on all the time. Coming up, we have the first ever Swarm fans hangout. Yes, there's still Swarm fans out there, and we are keeping it alive. So come next month, we're going to hang out in Discord. Next week, Nirmal and I will be here alone. No, I will be here by myself next week talking about courses, all my courses, including the one that we're getting ready to start in 2 weeks. That's this one. If you didn't know, I teach stuff. And this is one of the courses where we're talking about GitOps and Kubernetes deployments and automation and GitHub Actions, all my favorite things. And that starts in 2 weeks. It's live only, so you have to join now if you want to be in it. If you're interested, but you don't have time in July to do all this, you can actually go down and sign up on the wait list so you can find out about future dates. But it's a live Zoom chat where we are all together. Sadly, Nirmal won't be there. And we're going to learn stuff. Yeah. Maybe eventually. We also have a newsletter. I, of course, have to do all things. So newsletter, you learn about this show. In fact, we just sent out one this morning. You could have learned all about what was going to be on the show today. And you could learn about what was going to be on the podcast this week. Corey Quinn was on the podcast talking about all the ways to run AWS containers. So yeah, lots of stuff in there. Oh yeah, and more about GitHub Actions because it's kind of my thing this year. So this is all the things that we talk about on this channel. We also have merch because of course every channel on YouTube has to have merch, and there's a sale right now. So if you want your DevOps shirt, if you want Foxy, the Kubernetes pirate, if you want the sneaker nets, which is my favorite shirt, honestly. If you're an old school techie, what's that?
I wear it all the time.
You wear it all the time?
Yes.
Yeah, it is my favorite. We're gonna have to do like a one that has like an 80s synthwave vibe to it, I think, with like a pink background, like a Lamborghini driving down a highway or something. Yeah, we're gonna have to do that with this shirt because I'm feeling the 80s vibe on that, even though I guess that could be 80s. Yeah, that could be 80s as well as 90s.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not sure if we really had a lot of Ethernet in the 80s. Anyway, let's get to it. We've got special guest here today on the show. Thank you so much, Idit Levine from Solo.io. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
That's the people in chat clapping. That's actually really them. And that's not me pushing a button on my computer.
Yeah.
So we have people in chat, and I know we're going to get some questions because every time we have a service mesh / networking / Kubernetes, I'm going to call it plumbing, but it's way more exciting than that. All of these essential things in like the enterprise Kubernetes world. I wanted to back up a minute before we even get into the nerd stuff and talk about you and Solo.io and how that all got started, because I think Nirmal was there. I first saw you speak at DockerCon I think it was 2016 or 2017. I think it was 2017.
Yeah, 17.
Yeah, okay. And that was, I guess, early days for Solo.io?
Yeah, very early. I think back then we were like maybe 6-7 people. I think it was less than 6 months that we started. So definitely long time ago.
I remember you doing a demo of distributed tracing.
Yes.
And that was blowing my mind at that time.
Yeah, honestly, like it's funny, but I think that in that talks that I talked, what was like 5 years ago, something like that. What Solo is building today, it's the same thing that I talked about it 5 or 6 years ago. It just was way ahead of the time, 5 or 6 years ago, and now the market is kind of like ready for it, right?
Yeah.
But if you remember, it was all about that, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I was saying before the show that I remember when I was watching it. We were lucky, Nirmal. You were there, right, in 2017?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we got like Docker was nice enough to make you do your talk twice. Once before the keynote, and we all got to be in sort of a private little briefing room. And we got this. I thought it was like a Docker product, but then I realized, oh no, it's your thing. Docker's just bringing you in because that's how much they were excited about it. The idea of Solo IO was we've got to give you the insider track before we show it off to the rest of the world. And I remember feeling that feeling I had when I first understood Docker, where I was like, there's a lot of magic here. I don't understand how it's all working, but I think I want it. I mean, it was a easy sell for me. So tell me about like the origin, like a little bit of that origin story. Why did you start this? How did this start?
Yeah, so Solo itself. So I was in the open source for a while before that. I was one of the persons trying to push Unikernel back then. So Docker kind of like just got out, and then Unikernel started to be an interesting thing. I was in AMC back then, actually. And I worked at the city office, so my job was to do all the cool stuff, right? So I was all big kind of like on, back then on Docker and Kubernetes, and back then it was even Mesosphere and, all the swarm problem. So that was what I was doing. And I was very excited to kind of like learn about Unikernel. It was a lot of low level stuff, operating system. And I said to myself, wow, that's actually even more efficient than Docker itself. Can we actually, figure out if that will be the next big thing? And I think that what I learned from this the most is that in order to make that kind of a huge shift in the market like Docker did, it's really need to be a huge differentiator for what there is in the market. And I think that Docker was that huge differentiator versus Unikernel was a little bit better, but really minimized better. So it wasn't worth for us to retool all of it, all our infrastructure. So that's kind of like where so I was all in the open source community and so on. I decided to start Solo, honestly, because, honestly, big company are complicated. I thought we could do it way faster. And I wanted to be all focused about the technology itself and how we're going to change the world versus, kind of like, like all the bureaucracy that's happening in big company. So I just wanted to be about the technology and the engineers, and this is why I started Solo. So that's kind of like how we started it. But then when I looked at the market, what we saw is that there is, you could be already smart to understand that Kubernetes is the direction that everybody going to. So that's kind of like will be the de facto orchestration. But I think that what was clear to me back then is that while everybody is migrating their monolithic to a microservices, the big problem that we'll have next will be the network stack. And the reason is because, like now when you're taking this big binary and cut it to small pieces, you need somehow to connect, right? And now it's everything on the networks. We need to make sure that it's secure. And honestly, we talked about open tracing, but how do you debug something like that is so distributed? So all those problems I felt that will be something that we will need to attack. And then I noticed Linkerd was back then on the first version. So it wasn't, I like to say that it wasn't a sidecar, it was a side bus when they put it in the beginning. And it was so huge, Java. Yeah. And then I saw Istio make a little bit more, go to the right direction. And I said, okay, that's going to be huge. And though it will take years until people will adopt it, that's what will be the de facto eventually. So this is why we kind of like was leaning to it. And started with the gateway just because I knew it will take a lot of time. So we wanted to start with something that's easier to adopt. It's a stepping stone.
What was your vision back then, and how does that match with what you see today? What you're going to be presenting today?
Yeah, honestly, I have to say that it was almost one to what I said, which is pretty lucky me. So let me explain you again. When I started the company, it's a company, so eventually you need somehow to show traction, or otherwise you're not going to get the next round. So when I looked at it, I said to myself immediately, listen, like Istio, in my opinion, will be everywhere someday, but it's going to take it a while until we get there. So there's two things that I need to do. Number one, figure out what can I sell today, or make at least user use today, because that's what you really want. And Istio wasn't back then something that you could use. So that's where I started in the gateway and focused a lot on the gateway. And I said, look, the gateway is a stepping stone to the market. And honestly, there's a lot to do innovative there, because that was a very kind of like old-fashioned, honestly, service mesh ecosystem, which, MuleSoft and, Apogee and Kong, relatively, not the proxy that I will build my stack on. So when I looked at it, I said, that's the first thing that we need to kind of like attack. And that's what we did, our gateway. But the second thing that I tried to figure out is I said to myself, okay, but here is the thing. How am I making this service mesh adoptable and everywhere? So what I did pretty much in the beginning, I said to myself, let's envision that this is going to happen. Like Istio is going to be everywhere. So now the question is, what will be the next problem that people will have? And what I thought about the next problem, I thought about an orchestration problem, because most likely you will have more than one clusters. Usually you're putting one instance of service mesh per cluster. So how do you manage all of this? Are you physically going to go to each of them? Of course not. You need to build kind of like a CI/CD and, somehow to automate all the processes. And that's basically what we built in Solo next, which was the management plane, which is what we call Glue Mesh today. But it's basically the management plane to orchestrate all those service mesh and do, cross-cluster crazy stuff if you need to, and so on. So then observability of all of them and so on. So that's kind of like the two stuff that I think we started pretty much at the beginning. And again, that's what we're selling today. We have tons of customers running it. And I think that that's exactly what the market is going to. If you see what all the hyperscalers are doing, but all the new service mesh that came after it and trying to do the same thing, a little bit too late, but trying. I think that that's what we see. So it's not that different than what we see. We did build it more like to the size and to the top, because we learn a lot from our customers. So for instance, how do you consuming it? And developer portal is something that people ask for a lot. So we're using Backstage, right? And kind of like already to the stack. How do you do identity in workloads that are not Kubernetes? Oh, Spire. So let's bring that to the stack. So we kind of like growing the stack by, bringing more and more stuff as we learn what the customer really wants. But it's not that different in the point that that's the problem. We try to attack them and say that, exactly what people is trying to fix today. So was lucky, I guess.
Yeah. I love your mentioning of sort of we needed to figure out how to troubleshoot distributed systems, because I really do. I completely agree that it feels it's a completely different troubleshooting mechanism, and I feel like, okay, I'm going to step back a minute. I'm a little old, so when I got started in tech, it was pre-TCP/IP, right? It was pre-IP networks, and we got to implement IP. We had to read the entire book because we had to figure out how to make it work. DHCP was a luxury. We barely had DNS, right? Like it was very raw back then. And so I had all the advantages of learning this stuff on the ground. But I find that a lot of people come in to programming, come into DevOps, and they really don't have a strong IP set of fundamentals, right? Yeah. They maybe know what a subnet is. They maybe had to do it in class once in university. Maybe, they learned a little bit about binary and maybe how that can translate to an IP address. But like they don't have like this core set of skills of, I've got 5 systems. How do I correlate all this information and understand how they're all talking to each other? It's actually a hard problem. I feel like as an industry, we're not really doing good at training people on the skill set of troubleshooting or managing distributed system communications and stuff like that. Do you have any wisdom on that? On any?
This is actually funny. So you're going even lower to the stack, but if you're thinking about the way we're managing networking all our life, let's, as you said, go back then. Back then, if you wanted networking, you needed to actually take switches and bridges and actually connect them physically, right? To get that network. And all of this been done by the networking team. And then there were kind of like innovation, right? Virtualization. And they basically came with NSX and all this stuff that basically, Nasira did an amazing job there. But basically, if you think about the way they design it, it's not that different. Like it's still talking about vSwitch and vBridge. Like it's still, that's basically the core API. I think when we went to Kubernetes, we can kind of like start thinking about wait, but people just want networking. They don't care about bridges and networks. This is really low level stuff for them. So then we did 2 things that I think is very smart. Number one, now we, basically make it damn simple for the networking to come. Don't worry about it. It's just going to happen. Just use the CNI to work, right? It's a commodity right now. And then the second thing that I think we did nicely is kind of like separate a little bit the security from the networking, in the point that, not the implementation of it, but at least the API, right? the policy networking versus the actually connectivity, which I think is brilliant. So now think about it a little bit more. We do want to do stuff like when you're talking about networking, you're always talking about three things, right? You're talking usually about connectivity, you're talking about security, and you're talking about observability. That's the three things that you really care of. And that's true for everything. Like if you look at Palo Alto, they're talking about, you're looking at Cisco, they're talking about, if you're looking at service mesh companies, they're talking about. That's what people are doing when they're talking about networking. So now the question is, when we, in the service mesh ecosystem went, we said, how can we do this even simpler or bring another version more to the application layers? And I think that's what we try to do with service mesh. So yeah, you're getting those overlay, but honestly, it's IPs, right? And IPs is fine, but in the today market, I will prefer to talk about identity, right? Workload identity. I think it's way more strong. Otherwise it's limited. So to me, this is what service mesh is brought to the table, and it's everything that related to cryptographic identity, MTLS. So the way we are attacking it's a little bit different and way more on the application level versus talking about, as you said, low level stuff. And I think that's basically the layers that is unique here, and talking a lot about stuff that we can do in layer 7, for instance, right? Not only layer 4.
So
I think that
this translation from what we were used to in the past, thinking about what networking was at a lower level, what's the new abstraction? What's the new layers that you think we should be thinking about in this service mesh current state and future state?
So when you're thinking about in generally, like when you're thinking, I think that each of those problems that we described, right, observability, security, troubleshooting, all this stuff, is need to think about what we're going to do and how it's going to be all during the cloud, the stack. Because as you think, we are plumbers, right? That's what we're doing, and there is a big stack there. It's not one. So usually when I started Solo, I was lucky to see the 7 layers, kind of like diagram. There was a side model that we all know, and I like to say, here's what we do, right? In layer 4, there's 7. And so on. I think that now, in Solo internally, we like to talk about it as the stack, right? And what is the stack specific that we're talking about? We internally calling it cake, right? Because it's kind of like there is an increment for what we believe kind of like initiate that stack. So the first one is C, right, for the cake. And we like to, it's basically a CNI, right? Now, you can also, we Solo specifically also using Cilium a lot, but in the nutshell, this is a CNI because CNI to me is a commodity. That's the way I'm looking at this. This is something that is there. There's people that supplying this. Honestly, there's not a lot of interesting stuff happening there. I know eBPF is very exciting, but if you're thinking about how faster eBPF doing it versus something like IP table, we're talking about a 10 of a millisecond. I mean, honestly, no one care about, I don't think, very rarely you care about that latency. So I don't think that this is what's special, but Cilium is personally part of the CNCF, I think. So if I have to choose, I probably would choose this. But the C is basically for CNI. Then the A is everything that's related to MBN. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with MBN, but MBN is basically, it's a project. It's an initiative that started in the Istio community. It's actually started by Solo and by Google. 2 years ago, we started basically think about, can we simplify service mesh? And we individually basically came with the concept of MBN in Solo and in Istio and in Google, sorry. And because we had very good relationship and partnership, in some point, me and Louis Ryan, who is the founder of Istio, is in Google, basically realized that we're doing the same thing internally. So what if we will basically partner? So Solo and Google partnered over a year ago, we announced it. So it basically was like, I don't know, a year and a half ago. And we basically start kind of like merging what we each have to this stack that called Ambient. And we introduce it to the open source community. And what we try to think there is that how can we make service mesh simpler? And I think that the idea of service mesh was, can we abstract the network? Can we take the operational complexity outside of the business logic? That's what it is, right? This is why we're trying to do basically. We wanted to separate that way that the application team can own the business logic and will not be very tied to the operation level. But the way we implemented it is with Sidecar. And Sidecar is a very, very, it's really, really, it is parts of, if you want to, for instance, I don't know, redeploy the proxy because you have some CVEs or something like that, guess what? You need to redeploy the application again as well. So it's not really was like this.
Yeah,
right?
like you mentioned, a sidecar can easily turn into a side bus, right? And it's hard to manage all those sidecars.
Side train.
Exactly. So when we try to figure out how to re-envision that, we said we really need to make sure that the operation will be better, because that's kind of like affecting on the operation, right? If what you need to do is every time you want to upgrade for a CVEs or change something, you need to go to talk to the application team running it and tell them that you're going to redeploy. We didn't achieve what we wanted to do, right? So the question is, how can we do it? And that's where we came with Ambient. And Ambient, again, it's solving a lot of problems. There is 3 big ones. I personally, the one that I'm excited the most is the operational one. We really abstract now the operation from the so it's really a way, it's easier to operate in your organization and implement and get a lot of value. The second one is everything that's related to cost, and we all in almost recession. I don't know. Every day they're telling me something else, but obviously the market is not doing well. And what we see in generally from our customer or in generally in that market is that people are trying to save money, and infrastructure is a costly piece in your wasting or you spending money. Can we reduce that? And Ambient, because it's not doing a sidecar anymore, it's doing only one proxy per node, actually reduce this by dramatically. I think that it's 99, like we had a lot of blog talking about how much money we kind of like reducing, but there is even a customer that told us that they will be able to actually buy our product because they're saving so much time and money in the infrastructure, which is insane, right? So that's that, and then everything that related to actually the functionality and everything is going to be equivalent. So, and even latency, we think that we can get better. We already see better performance. So all that point, this is Ambient is big. I'm really excited about it, and honestly, like working with customers, there's a lot of excitement in the market in generally, and it's all open source, of course. So, Solo is the main contributing for Ambient together with Google, and we are pushing it, and it will get to GA hopefully soon. But we're really excited about that. So that is the A. Let's bring us to the K. The K, it's easy. You don't need to explain. It's Kubernetes. And the last but not least is a E for Envoy. And Envoy is what we believe that is the main proxy, in the market today for layer 7 management, mainly, right? So we're calling it in the notion of ambient waypoint, but basically Envoy is just the way it built, the way that it's driven by an API, the way that you can customize with the Envoy filter. There's so many beneficial for us. We're working with this for 6 years, and we can't talk enough about that. So that's kind of like the last piece of the cake, right?
Of the cake.
Of the cake.
I was actually surprised that cake had a C in it, because like if it's in the Kubernetes world, it's not allowed to have C's. So I like it. We were actually talking before the show about this is a good analogy to LAMP stack, which if those of you out there watching, if you were around 20 years ago, LAMP stack was the cool thing. And it was just a combination of really not related. I mean, technologies that could easily be stacked on top of each other in a different way, but PHP was having a moment. MySQL was this cool open source database, and it was freeing us from Oracle and Microsoft SQL and all the things. And so, and Apache web servers, of course, which are still, I don't think I go a month without demoing something on HTTPD, so it's still a thing. So we had that, was it Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. So that was the stack. Yeah. And so now we have this service mesh stack, and this is a great.
It's networking stack, right? Because it's even taking, right? Yeah.
It's true. Yeah, because you got the CNI component, right?
Exactly.
We have a question in chat that is a good segue off of this. Mr. Maji, I'm going to say that. What is the main difference between service mesh and API gateway? Is it all about security?
So it's, as I said, in networking, you're always talking about 3 things, right? Which is security, observability, and connectivity, right? So that's both of them doing exactly the same thing. The only difference is that in the API gateway, usually you're using one that is entry to something like as word as the gateway. And usually you're doing more stuff that's related to external rate limiting, a lot of stuff that is outside your organization. This is the feature that you will probably be more interesting. Versus service mesh is more taking at what we calling east-west traffic. So once you are in the cluster and you right now wanted to talk to two services is talking to each other, that's the east-west traffic. And some of the stuff that you're doing on the gateway will just not make a lot of sense to do once you're already inside. So that's the huge difference. So there is the north-south traffic, which is everything that goes into your cluster. And again, usually you don't know who those people are talking to, right? If someone is coming and wanted to make a request, you don't know who it is. You need to be very more careful about how I'm going to give him to go and what am I likely to do. Versus if it's already in your cluster, then now we're talking about identity, not of users, but all on workload, right? What is the identity of those services? Am I allowed to talk to each other? What are they can do and so on. So just different. Like for instance, you're not going to do probably transformation, which is something that is very popular when you're doing on the gateway. Transform kind of like most likely not want to do that between services. Maybe, I don't know. Like that's what we see at least. So again, it's the same idea of eventually it's the same technology in the point that it's a proxy, right? It's been implemented by a proxy, which is the data plane, and a control plane that is basically giving configuration and fitting the proxy to make the proxy ability to make a decision when the request is coming. The only question is that, it's a little bit different of if the request coming outside or if the request coming inside the cluster. So this is how usually we differentiate it from.
I like it. I like that definition. Sorry, go ahead.
Do those two things work together? Do you suggest that the use case for customers is to combine those things together?
Definitely. So I mean, so think about it. So we see in our customers two types. Mainly one of them, they basically they're calling it two-tier, right? So basically they have one cluster management plan that basically has those gateway on top of it. They're doing a lot of the rate limiting, external, all those stuff. And then there is another proxy that is basically an ingress to those clusters, but is really kind of like a go-to. It's not doing much, right? So that's one option. And the other option that we see is that people are actually putting gateway in each of those clusters. And then you can, then it's more like it's one tier cluster. And if it's hit one of the cluster, it will know about the other cluster's workload. And if it's not, it doesn't need to go to him. You will forward it to the run that the workload is on that cluster. So that's the two type that we see. But personally, the way we build it, the cake stack, is because our product is believing, our tagline is basically any connection, any direction, one API. And this is why we believe, right? Because we really believe that eventually it's the same technology. So we have one API that will drive gateway and mesh the same way, because honestly, eventually what you're doing is all those three things that we talked about it all the time. So this is our personal belief in. So, and I do think that it's kind of like emerged together. Like most of our customers are buying the mesh, they're usually buying also the gateway, because it's a cloud native gateway that suits very nicely to the
they go well together.
Yeah, go very well together.
Yeah, in fact, when I'm thinking about whether you're an application architect or a infrastructure architect where you're designing traffic patterns, I would be curious, like your experience where in my own consulting, there's this moment where maybe it's really just their adoption of Kubernetes, maybe, where they start to conceptualize this sort of, I guess it becomes a problem of the north-south versus east-west traffic. And they realize that, things in my cluster should ideally not go outside of my cluster to come back into the cluster.
Exactly.
And it sometimes forces application design decisions, separate tools or different kinds of tools. Do you see that problem, and do you see them just like using service mesh to solve all of it, or does it solve that fundamental design decision, or is that really more of an application architect kind of thing? I'm just curious.
No. I think that this is where we started. I don't know, when we started, I remember that because I was working in EMC, so with Pivotal very closely back on the day, right before I started solo. And I think that that's how it works in all those stacks, right? Basically, there's no problem. If one microservices want to talk to the other one, they will go back to the gateway and they will go back. But oh my God, this is so not efficient, as you can probably assume. So I think that that's what was very nice about service mesh, that we said, you know what, it doesn't need to go there. We can actually go directly. We just need to make sure that it's still secure. We need to make sure that it's still giving you observability. And so I think this is exactly where it's target. What we see is this: if you are a small cluster, usually, honestly, maybe service mesh is not the first thing that you will put in. Like a small company have two very little cluster, don't worry about that. that. You shouldn't
Right.
like get where you need to because you have no choice. It has to be secure. If you have very little, don't worry about it. What we see is that where it's more interesting. So first of all, we see, as I said, FedRAMs and a lot of stuff that related to security, zero trust. That's big driver from service mesh, and we get it everywhere. Like it's really like tons of customer, so on. Observability, big ones as well. Like, listen, I mean, I remember when I did this tracing demo, Jerome from Docker sent me this tweet that I'm using it all the time. And that was a tweet that someone said, I migrate from my monolithic to microservices. And right now, every time that I have an outage, it's like a murder mystery. It doesn't even know how to start to go about doing it.
So true.
It's true. And every time I'm trying to get everybody else because it's true. It's so funny. So listen, when you have a big cluster, a lot of application, it's really hard to understand what's going on. And I think that that's where this stack is helping you, the cake, because, is the package is not here? Is that this is a problem? Where is the problem? So this is one thing that we see a lot. And then if you're already there, so, it's nice that you can actually control all your, resilience of the mesh for one location, right? So, and of course, when I'm saying zero trust is also, it's identity and, an MTLS as well as all the authorization, authentication, so right, which is very important.
It sounds like with the ambient mesh, you can kind of get closer to the balance between reliability, resiliency, the security aspects, regardless of where the workload is servicing that request and authentication authorization is coming in, and also efficiency and cost and scale and performance, and getting closer to being able to balance all of those concerns that are pulling your architecture in different directions and help you navigate those compromises in the architecture. Is that kind of where the sweet spot is for the ambient mesh, for the cake?
But also more than this. I mean, the way we kind of like change the change of the shift of kind of like the cloudless motion, which is ambient, is giving us other stuff. Like, for instance, what we noticed is that a lot of our customers are interested in starting with zero trust, so they need MTLS. But honestly, they don't really care about layer 7 too much at that point. Like, it's not that maybe observability is not the first thing that they wanted to attack or resilient. They still, in the old fashion, needed to basically adopt those sidecars, which means that they're getting the complexity of managing, which is all they want is really MTLS. So right now in ambient, we basically kind of like separating layer 7 with layer 4 with layer 7, right? Which basically means that if all you're interested is in ambient, basically everything that's related to encryption, MTLS, you can adopt it very easily, right? With what we're calling Z-tunnel. That's basically giving you that. It's so damn simple. You don't need to change anything. Your application doesn't even know that you apply that on your cluster, which is fantastic. And then if you wanted to start adopting the layer 7, now you can adopt and bring Envoy to the stack, right? And then you can basically do a lot of the stuff that you want for the different stuff. Now, we personally have observability also in the Z-tunnel itself. So you're basically getting it all. But that's, I think, where is the magic is kind of like, honestly, what I learned in my career right now, definitely in open source, but then bringing open source to the enterprise, which is only why we're doing it. We're doing all of this eventually because we want everybody to use our software. So it's very important to understand how the user is going to adopt it and how to make it very simple and where is the hiccup that they have by adopting it. And I think that that's what NPM got very right? They understand the relationship inside the organization and also the adoption kind of like way. I mean, think about it. Adopting CNI. Like I hear a lot about people right now talking about Cilium and CNI. CNI is a commodity. It's not giving you much. It's basically all of them giving almost the same thing. But the adoption of getting it, replacing your CNI, that's a lot, right? And usually you're not getting a lot in return. Versus the beautiful of Ambient is just apply. No matter which CNI you're using, just apply it on the cluster that you're going. Your application doesn't even know. You don't need to redeploy your application. You're just getting the benefit without all the hassle. And I think that that's the big win for that architecture, if it makes sense.
That does make sense. Bret, do we want to answer another? I think there was another question. Let me see if I can.
Yeah. Jeremy had a question.
Yeah, that's right.
Which I feel like I know the answer, but I'm not going to provide a leading question. Where do y'all see service mesh going in the next few years? I was told once that service mesh is now where Kubernetes was about 5 years ago, hype wise.
Yes, which is good, right? It's adopted, which again, honestly, like, let's be honest, it's not an easy thing. Like, I mean, there is a reason why as Google, right? And as Solo started working on this 6 years ago, and only right now we got it very right and we learn. And this is we adjust, right? Because it's not a simple thing. I mean, you think about it, but I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're leveraging eBPF, we're leveraging, Rust as a proxy. We did so many stuff that we learned to make sure that it will be very easy to adopt. So I do believe, and this is what I said on the beginning, when I started Solo, I knew it will take 2 years until we would get to that maturity that actually, I'm telling you, like, you using it every day, you just don't know that. Like, I mean, as I said to you, our customers personally, that the one I know, because that's a customer that we Solo have. I'm sure there's more in the world that adopting service mesh, but when you're filling your taxes, you're using it. When you're buying, I don't know, Chipotle, Domino's Pizza, Chick-fil-A, you're using it. When you, I don't know, swiping your card, you know what I mean? And more you're buying your car with Carfax, you're using FICA. Everything you're using is basically Istio is implemented behind the scene. You just don't know that. So to me personally, it's really, really exciting. And again, we have hundreds of customers like it. And it's always fun, to go somewhere and say to my kids, they're using us, and they're using us, and they're using it, because it's everywhere. So it's really exciting. So I do believe that it's as starting to be as adopted as Kubernetes. I think that, we see it everywhere, and we're excited about it. And I think Ambient is just going to make this adoption even more, easy. And again, for good reason, because I think that the only thing that I can say about this too, which is very important, and service mesh in general, first of all, there's a reason why everybody else is trying to get to try to introduce a new mesh to the market, right? Because this is what everybody needs. It's a real problem that people are solving. So again, we just added 6 years ahead of time. This is why Istio is so good. And we learned a lot from running it in production. And I think that the second one is that, so I really believe that this is right now is the right time to make this mass adoption for that. And I'm very excited that it's going to that direction. So,
I'm gonna be honest for a moment. Much like in the early days of Kubernetes, okay, so I'm an operator, so I come from the ops side of this, right? So when I think of systems, whether it's Kubernetes itself or some other infrastructure or something like Istio, I think about I think a lot more about day two ops, like the things that I have to do later, the upkeep, the complexity that I'm going to have to help the developers with. The burden I'm giving them is more YAML they have to write, and I was not a huge fan of Kubernetes in the early days, mostly because of that sort of like the implementation and management problem, which we have much better tooling now. Like installers are almost a dime a dozen at this point. We have lots of options up and down the stack for how to get Kubernetes, how to maintain it. You can now use it without ever having SSH or touching a node. All that's great. And with service mesh, my initial hang up was the joke around turtles all the way down, proxies all the way down. And I saw that infrastructure cost and management as this huge weight that I would have to carry with me. So I would hesitate even suggesting it to customers, even when I knew that they could probably use, like, maybe if they don't have the requirements for MTLS or whatever, and maybe it's just observability they might benefit from. I would sometimes hesitate because I was afraid that there would be a kickback. Like they would yell at me for suggesting a complex burden type of additional stuff on top of them already implementing Kubernetes, which a lot of times was new to them. And I feel like this ambient mesh to me is like it's the sign to me. I feel like that, okay, now's the time to invest and we're getting a much, like I think you were saying before the show, around like this massive cost reduction for your customers. You're seeing, there's always these stories we hear around Kubernetes around the the cost of the infrastructure to run Kubernetes and the things on it. And so like the app is like this little thing that runs on top, and there's all this other stuff underneath. 80% of your servers are for just running the infrastructure.
20 backend services per app.
Yeah,
exactly.
And we have hope. I guess I'm seeing the light. I'm starting to. You're convincing me.
I said that, and as I said, what's good about what we did is that and this is what I started to say. I mean, we got the use case right, and this was from the beginning in Service Mesh. The reason there was so much hype even 6 years ago, even though it wasn't ready, it was because people did have that problem. Like observability is a real problem. MTLS is a real problem. We didn't change anything in this. The only thing that we changed is how we make the implementation better to make it easier to adopt. And I think that we got it now. I am, it was a lot of work with a lot of customers to get how to do this and where is the hurdles of why it's hard for them to adopt and all of this thing. Honestly, to me, Ambient is like the best of all the world. You're getting everything you need. The operation is relatively very low and saving tons of money. So it's like everything I went, it couldn't be better. So I'm personally extremely excited about it. And I will be honest with you, I also see this with our customers and our user in the open source community. Like there's a lot of excitement. And you see this from the hyperscaler, right? The hyperscaler start. So Google they started Ambient with us. So of course they are on this, right? And, Microsoft announced that they're going to do Ambient that they're basically offering Ambient as part of their Azure stack. And I know that we're working a lot with AWS. We have partnerships, Solo's partnership with AWS. So I can tell you that they bring us to a lot of customers. And knowing AWS, if they bring us to a lot of customers, eventually they probably will do it themselves. So my guess is that eventually it will be adopted by the 3 big cloud, which is a big maturity, right? Sign.
Yeah, so to the folks out there that tried Istio and implemented a service mesh, got burned with the operational overload and overhead, let's say like 24 months ago, around that time frame, now's the time to come back and check out Ambient Mesh. Is that the right
100%?
kind of...
100%. It's not a GA yet, but we're working, as I said, like I think there is like probably 30 or 40 people from Solo itself that contributing to to the Istio open source in order to make Ambient production ready and get it to the same maturity. And we're working on it for 2 years, right? So I mean, it should be right now just about. So I think right now it's going to be, and Istio by itself is going to be graduated. I think you guys know that very, very soon. It's always be voted. So there's a lot of signs that showing, okay, now we agree. Right? Everybody agree. Istio is this service mesh that basically won that war, and Ambient is the mode that everybody will use in order to run Istio. So I'm very excited personally. I'm happy because for 6 years we're working on this. I know, finally.
Yeah. So I just, oops, wrong button. This
is actually a good one to say. Yeah.
Yeah. I love how, okay. So in case people didn't realize, because I didn't know this actually before we met today, 3 of the 6 TOC members. So if I want Istio expertise, I just need to come to Solo. Like basically.
Yes. So I mean, this is interesting. I will tell you the story that happened. So as you know, I was in the open source pitching Istio, right? When we were talking 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And there was different people that doing it in the community. So one of them was the founder, Louis Ryan from Google. The other one was Lynn from IBM. IBM and Google is the one that announced Istio, right? So they were together. And there was Niraj, who was in a startup called Ambient Mesh, who basically was a spin-off of F5 for Istio. And there was Christian Posta, who was from Red Hat, and he was the person who's pushing it in Red Hat. And we just become such a good friends because that's, we were in all those tracks and talks in all those conferences. And the thing that I'm excited the most is that all of them joined Solo. So Louis Ryan is the CTO of Solo right now, is the founder of Istio. I'm here, of course. And Niraj is running all our engineering. Lynn running all our open source, and we have a big team of open source contributor. And Christian is running all our field, basically the field CTO, working actively with all the customers as well as evangelism, running the team of the evangelism. So we just, honestly, we're having a blast anyway because we just love each other and we love the technology. So it's a lot of fun.
It's the super fans.
Really fun.
I should mention while we're here, there's a couple of resources too. Before we start, I got some more questions, but you have an academy. So there's, I put these links all in chat if everyone just scrolls up in chat. So you have the academy on-demand courses. I love it when the jets fly by my house right as I want to talk. It's just perfect. I live near a Navy air base, so they always say, hey, Bret's on the internet. Let's just fly. Fly over his house. Buzz the tower. But you have a lot here. eBPF, of course, Cilium, all this stuff, Envoy, all the pieces of that cake stack. And then there's also something else I put in chat, and you also can get links below for everyone watching. You also have an ebook on Ambient Mesh explained. So someone in chat, I think, was it Jeremy, mentioned a book.
Jeremy.
Yeah, the Istio Ambient Mesh book by Lin Soon and Christian
That's this one.
Posta.
Yeah,
That's this one.
yeah.
Oh, is this it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, this is this one.
Oh, yeah. It says right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So for those that want more information, of course, in the podcast, we'll put the links in the show notes and all that stuff so everybody can get it.
Yeah, so we talked about service mesh and about adoption, and we believe in two things. First of all, as I said, the way we're working with our customers, we are with them, right? I mean, we're all working with Slack. We make them successful. We have a lot of companies, so we saw a lot of pinpoint, and we're helping them doing this. But the other thing more important for this, we want to make sure that they know how to do this. So a lot of the work that Solo is doing is basically Solo Academy, which is how we're teaching people in the open source community. It's all for free. In our enterprise customer, everybody is basically how to learn this amazing technology. So, before we even announce Ambient, we already have workshop books, how do you actually, because that's all about, open source is all about adoption. And you really need to make sure that people are capable of adopting it. It's not only about how you're writing the code and how clean it is. It's important too, but you also need to make sure that people can unwrap for it. So that's something that is extremely important to us.
Yeah. As someone who teaches for a living, this stuff is hard. And even after we've learned it, it's hard to imagine being that new person, right? Once we've learned it, it's like that human phenomena of we don't know what it's like to be the noob anymore. And for years, people have asked me for a service mesh course, but I've been, again, because of that same sort of mindset I had around, it's too hard. It's moving too fast. It's moving too fast. There's a lot of choice and diversity, and how do you make it's kind of like people ask for a CI course, and it's like, well, I'd have to pick a tool because I can't teach them all. And so I think I kept getting requests for an Istio course, and I was hesitant because of I wasn't convinced that the sidecar model was the long-term approach. So I'm glad to see this because now I'm like, maybe this is the thing that I should teach. And this is a question we have. Is someone asking on where to go? Is Ambient Mesh as secure as the sidecar model?
Oh, that's a great question. So it is, first of all. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're doing there in order to how to bring the traffic and redirecting that it is very secure, and you will see new stuff that Solo is doing in order to make sure that it's really, 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 really secure. So the answer is yes. But we do see that if you have a very, 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 workload that you extremely worry about it, you can run it side by side. What it means is that you can potentially say those workloads I want to have still a sidecar because I'm feeling very uncomfortable, but how important they are, and the rest will run with the Z tunnel. So you can do that too. But I mean, honestly, there's a lot of internal work that we're doing right now. We'll give it eventually away to basically make sure that it's as secure, 100% as the sidecar. So that's honestly, otherwise it's never going to adopt it, right? I mean, that was the baseline. First, we need to make sure that as secure as. Now we can talk about the other thing that we're trying to do. So that was very important to us. And don't forget, we did it together with Google. As part of this, we run it by the security team of the Google Cloud and what they think about. So this is it wasn't something that, we came out of our end. We actually made a lot of talk to other people and so on before we kind of decided to introduce that.
I was imagining, I think it was yesterday, I was thinking about questions about, I actually learned about Ambient Mesh because of you coming on the show. I missed the bus or the car or the train or whatever word. I missed that last year when it was announced. And one of my big questions was, I was trying to imagine how this came about, right? And obviously, it feels like a lot of the things that I assumed were true. There's a high infrastructure cost to service mesh. There's a high complexity cost of the initial sort of iterations. And I was wondering if the simple, us evolving to this, I'm going to call it one proxy per node approach, or however you want to say it, was a matter of just simply getting the isolation and the sort of the implementations into the proxies and the different tunneling technologies, because the sidecar model to me seemed almost like we're just taking existing tools that we have and we're making them work, right? Yeah. And like this proxy, we know that these two won't be able to talk to each other because they're literally separate containers for each one of our pods or whatever, and we don't have to worry about security isolation inside the same process and all the stuff that I guess you would have to worry about if you consolidate it like this. So is that what's been happening? Is sort of like you initially visioned this as I guess my question is, when you started, it sounds like you already had this vision for it's going to get easier, it's going to get simpler and smaller and less of a burden, and you saw that happening at the beginning?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with Solo, but I can tell you that the thing that I care about the most, and was kind of like something that was very hardly in the DNA of Solo, is, I'm engineers, right? So I do care about code a lot, but eventually we need to make sure that people will use it. And honestly, This is something that I learned from being in EMC and the Unikernel, because Unikernel wasn't adopted, and it broke my heart, right? I was doing all this work, and it was so cool, and no one wanted to use that. So, so if something I learned from this is that, we're building not for fun, we're building it for people to actually get benefit from it. That's what we want. We want to influence the world. So to me, the driving for Ambient was mainly on the operational. I will argue that not on the cost. That's just a nice side effect, honestly, that right now we're leveraging from it as a vendor. But honestly, it wasn't about that. It was more about the fact that operationally, it was hard. As you said, the second day operation was hard to manage, right? You have a CV. What are you doing right now? You're doing this. It's just become how is to put it on one class, not a big deal. How do you put it to run in your infrastructure? And that's the work that Solo was doing, right? How do we make it Ambient, Istio and generally, enterprise ready, enterprise ready that actually can be implemented and consumed. And I think that honestly, it's in every technology. Kubernetes was the same thing, right? When Kubernetes was introduced to the world by Google, actually the people that really make it enterprise ready were the Red Hats of the world, right? Because they had customers that run in production. Mm-hmm. So to me, this is what we were focused. So to me, the Ambient was all about the operation in the beginning. And as I said to you, security have to be, so that have to be checked. So that let's put it aside. Now, what is the benefit to me is the adopting layer 4 and don't have to adopt layer 7 if you don't need it, as well as the separation, the real abstraction, the real ambient, right? It's really ambient in your infrastructure right now. You don't really need to. So this is where the name coming from. So that's, to me, it's the most benefit, and this is where we drive it. I don't know. Yeah. I don't think, as I said, cost is nice and architecture is nice, but eventually, you're using it. Do you know how complex is your operating system? Not, do you not? Because you don't care. You're just running it. It's working. Do you care about eBPF? I mean, eBPF is very nice because it can make the high level, user experience better. But do you really care? Do you really, really care about the speed and the byte and what they're doing? No, right, you don't. Right. You shouldn't. Right? You're the user. So to me, this is where I think the Ambient is
I think that's an ideal state, like an operations team member coming from the ops side. Ideally, we don't want to care. It's that we're forced to care.
Exactly. Which is fun, right? I mean, I'm an engineer. I like that, right? But I mean, honestly, like as much as we can make it easy to adopt, as much as it will become as simple as. And as I said, are we using eBPF there and saying, yes, do you need to know about it? I don't know. Maybe. But why do you really? It's a very complex operating system stuff. And by the way, that's exactly what Cilium doing, right? They're abstracting it. You cannot run eBPF as much as you want. They pick and choose the pieces of eBPF that they're leveraging, because honestly, eBPF, it's a low-level technology. Mm-hmm. So you need to leverage in order to make the experience for the user better. But you don't need to, I don't know, it's not going to solve all your problem in the world.
Once a customer adopts Ambient Mesh, does that open up new use cases that they couldn't have done before? Things like scaling out, maybe data use cases. Can you talk a little bit more about what opportunities open up once this ambient message is in place?
So I will be honest, like every technology that I adopted in the beginning, you need to make first the thing that people ask you. So I can tell you that in that point, Istio itself actually had Like it's by far the most mature service mesh that exists in the world. There is stuff that other service mesh just trying to implement right now, and they already forget that they have it, right? I mean, it's just in terms of the maturity of where we are. So there is a lot of maturity of how people is doing, like the how many features Istio as a service mesh is covering. So first of all, when we introduced Ambient, it was important to us to make sure that it is mature. And honestly, it's the same project. It's not a new project. It's just a different mode, right? So the changes that we're doing there is not drastically. It's a new architecture in a way, right? So all those features have to work. That's number one. And I think this is something that was very important to us. And I think that, as I said, that's when we would call it GA. But all those features that work with this will work with that as well. So I think this is the most important thing. New features that we implement, I'm trying to figure out if there will be more stuff that will be implemented. There is some advantage on Gateway API that we are looking at right now. But I will argue that as a city, I think that the amount of we really tried to say, hey, look, we got the use case right.
Yeah.
Just the implementation was a little bit more expensive and more, hard to maintain. Now we get rid of that burden. So now it's exactly the same maturity that you will expect after 6 years of a project, but 7 years, I think, soon. And basically, just the implementation is make it easy to consume, which is what we wanted to achieve. So I don't know that there is a lot. We should think there's probably will come more, but
yeah, I think one of the big things within the Kubernetes community is the developer experience, right? Trying to figure out how these layers are consumed. To me, there's a potential here with Ambient Mesh adoption that a lot of that surface area that was a rough edge with respect to a developer experience can be handled by something like an Ambient Mesh. And the use cases then enable a better abstraction on top of Kubernetes, maybe even making Kubernetes closer to invisible to a developer when they're looking at adopting or pushing their app to production or to some cluster somewhere.
So that's a great question. You ask about use case. What I will tell you is that usually when you're talking on the mesh, definitely the other provider are very, very, very talking about the Kubernetes ecosystem, which is make a lot of sense, right? But honestly, what we see is that our customers, there's no workload that they basically did not ask for us, right? It's everything. It's Lambda, and it's a multi-cluster, and it's VM, and it's eBPF, and it's Fargate, and it's everything else that you can imagine. So one of the things that we're doing with Ambient is exactly that, like making sure that we will include everything. Like that's become there's a reason why Istio was not part of Kubernetes. And the reason it's because it's not only for Kubernetes workload. And everywhere you need to make sure that you secure an MTLS and, observe. So that's nicely kind of like, the mesh kind of like is layered on all your infrastructure and multi-cloud, multi-workload, multi-everything. I think this is the key. And that's the use case that we see right now. So, most of our customers at least want 2 cloud that they provide.
Yeah. And multiple services. I think we're seeing an increased adoption of Kubernetes being one of the interfaces into connecting your workloads to other services, other clouds, other cloud managed services, on-premise. And even though Istio is now part of the Kubernetes ecosystem, I think it's more of a tell around the Kubernetes ecosystem expanding beyond just containers. And
because you always have, most of the time, I mean, if I were looking at our customer, there's very little customer that can say they're only using Kubernetes. Honestly, most of the customers, they always have something, some VMs out there, and a lot of the time mainframe, honestly, right? A lot of the bank that we're working on is they have a lot of VM, way more VM than Kubernetes, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And they have ECS a lot of the time, right? Which is, not
That's
everybody.
Nice to hear.
I know it's a surprise, but not everybody's using Kubernetes. Yeah. So I think that's the and even other tooling. This is something that Solar is working on a lot. But I mean, we talked a little bit about the gateway kind of like become part of the mesh, right? Kind of like integrated into the mesh. So developer portal is something that is extremely important in that phase. And there is in the CNCF, there is the project called Backstage, which is really, really popular right now, came from Spotify. So Solo, for instance, is part of their stack because we are understanding how important it is for people to consume those microservices, not only to make sure that they're connected secure, but eventually you have an application team somewhere and they need to consume it. So we build ours on basically Backstage. So we have a plugin and so on. So again, it's just working more with customer. You see what they're adopting. It's really nicely to kind of like fit that technology and enable, as you say, it's deployment. Not that different than what Docker did, right? Deployment for infrastructure, just the networking planning in that case.
We had a question on FIPS compliance, and
I think that was answered potentially.
Yeah, someone said it. They thought it was. I just wanted to bring it up for the people on audio that don't get to read the chat.
That's fair.
You do have a FIPS page on. I do the same thing. I'm like, well, it was answered in chat. Oh, that's right. We have a podcast. So you have a page. I wasn't. When you're deploying Ambient Mesh, is it the same binary of Istio that you
STOD.
like? It's like it's just a switch we're flipping. Essentially, it's not a separate project that we have to install.
It's a mod. No. Like, I mean, in Service Mesh, you have what called a data plan and a control plan. Data plan is usually a proxy. It's can do a lot of stuff, but it's pretty dumb. You need to tell him what to do. That's what the control plan is doing. So the control plan in Istio called STOD. That's the same thing. We didn't change that. It's all good. Now the data plan. So for the layer 7, we're still using Envoy, which is what we're calling the waypoint in the MBN world. For the layer 4 encryption and all of this, we wrote in Rust something called zTunnel. Will basically bring you all the functionality of this. So the STOD is basically they're giving configuration to Envoy or to zTunnel or to the ingress, right? Doesn't matter. It's always done that. So now it's just another way for him to do this. And so that's how it works. So yeah, it's still FIPS compliance. It's very exciting that it's FIPS compliance. We have tons of government, customers that running it, or people that selling it to government that running it. So they have to use FIPS compliance, and it is. So
yeah,
pretty exciting.
Nirmal and I are on the East Coast, U.S., so we both have prior government experience. So we. If we are not asking the FIPS question, someone else is going to ask for it. So
that's very familiar territory.
I'm in the East too, so
yeah.
I had a project a few years ago dealing with FIPS compliant OpenSSL binaries, and it was it's always a hassle, but necessary. I have so we're over the hour. Thank you everyone for all the great questions. If I missed a question, feel free to repeat it in chat. But I'm going to I'm going to change the subject real quick because I have a question. Now that I know you have this background in unikernels, because like you said, it definitely had a moment, right? There was a moment where we were all excited about unikernels.
Yeah.
I remember Docker bought at least one unikernel company.
Yeah.
We've been talking about cloud. I'm going to call it cloud native WebAssembly. Essentially, WebAssembly on servers in Kubernetes. And I don't know how much you've been following that, but do you feel
I did. Okay,
cool.
We use WebAssembly in order to dynamically load customization to Envoy. So we know WebAssembly really, really well. So probably the question that you wanted to ask, would it be the next thing that everybody will use?
Actually, no. Sorry. It's a little bit of a curveball, I think. Do you think, so being a fan of unikernels, I've at KubeCon, by the way, I keep running into unikernel fans. Like, they're out there. Like
I know, they still send me after 8 years. Yeah.
So with the the coming of Wasm and the WASI standard and what I hope that we're eventually going to get to with Kubernetes, where it just works. It's everywhere. It's another runtime. It's on all the nodes. It's just transparent to the developer. Do you think that that's even less reason now that we're going to end up caring about unikernels? Is the future that we're not going to get back to unikernels?
I don't think we will hear about unikernels mainly because there's no one who's working on it physically. So I don't actively. Yeah. So I don't think that that's something that will happen. I will say that after there was the mini VM initiative, I think in Microsoft and some stuff that didn't catch. Now there is Wasm. I think it's catching a bit more, but honestly, I also as I said to you, here's the question. In order to right now reinvent new market or reset market, it really needs to be really beneficial because every new technology that you introduce, the tool set is not mature enough. And what we did with Docker was so amazing because we said, oh my God, it's going to change our way we're doing everything. So I get it, right? So this is why it's successful. would the market is ready for another one shift? I don't think the WebAssembly benefit will be as strong as exactly like the Unikernel wasn't and mini VM wasn't. I think that there is some use cases. When I was working on the Unikernel, I was talking about serverless as an interesting use case because you want to spin it way faster, and with container it's a little bit slower. And security wise, because they, like think about all this like hardware, I don't know, like speaker of today, they're still running Linux container, like Linux.
Right.
A little bit overkill, and the surface of attack is bigger. So if you really want something very, very secure, maybe Unikernel / Wasm, all this stuff is probably a better solution for that. I will argue that there's not a lot of use case. It's very a niche kind of like use case. So I don't know, and whether you're getting a little bit milliseconds faster, I just don't know that it's worth the work in order to make it easy to operate. I will be honest. Yeah. So I personally not a big I'm not, even though I'm excited about Wasm itself, and as I said, we leverage it for Envoy. I don't know if you can run the native code, write a native code, it will be faster. So harder but faster.
Yeah. So Bret and Idit, I think we can see the impact of those unikernel features in the subsequent advances in like the container runtime. The design of it's the imprint of what unikernels excelled at is in these other technologies.
Right. Yeah, like it affected things, but it didn't necessarily become the thing. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm glad I have a similar opinion, so I'm glad to hear you say stuff to confirm my own biases, because I'm a fan of the idea of things like unikernels and WebAssembly, but like you, I also know like we're still talking about, like, there's still people implementing Docker, right? Like we're about to celebrate this is the 10th year, I think. Yeah, the 10th year of Docker. And we still have a significant portion of the industry still trying to figure out how to use containers in a lot of places. Still a lot of Kubernetes adoption going on. And then there's all these new things, and it's like, sometimes I wonder, are these technologies too early? Like we're maybe 5 years too early or something. Yeah.
And also, are they needed? Like, I mean, let me give you an example, okay? eBPF, a lot of people are talking about. I'm a big fan, by the way. So I want to be very clear. Let's put it aside. I think it's very useful. We're using it every day. I can tell you that much. Right?
Noted. Right.
But a lot of the marketing tools is going and talking about the fact that it's faster, which it is. The question is for how much. And here our customers care. So as I said, we're talking right now, some of the time it's like 10 of a millisecond. Is that really why you want to change all your stack to something more complicated?
Yeah.
No, you're not, because it's not meaningful. You don't even know that's that. So to me, this is one thing that is very, very important. And I think you said that. I mean, maturity is important. And to me, what driving adoption is user experience. So it's fine that the marketing is going and saying, it's faster, it's faster. I'm telling you, what I see for my customers is that they have a quota of latency. That's how much they're willing to be. If it's above that, they're not okay. But if it's in between that, you know what then they want? Features. They want features. That's what they want. They want usability of feature. They don't care about the fact that it's a little bit microsecond more expensive in latency. And that's, I think, what people, it's, definitely in the open source, and a lot of the time, I'm a technologist too. I mean, I worked in EMC. All my job all what I did was having fun with the technology. And we did amazing stuff with the Unikernel and so on. But honestly, I didn't think about adoption. It wasn't my job in EMC. And I think that technology that's not being adopted will die, because eventually people will stop working on this. So that to me is there's something I learned in Sol. It's like, focus on the right thing and focus on user experience, way more important than the micro millisecond of the, if it will give you a little bit more technology, but you need to reinvent all those tooling. And, so.
Yeah. I like the saying, and I don't know who I first heard this from, was you don't have a performance problem until you have a performance problem.
Right. And there is people that there is. I'm not saying that no one care about performance, right? There is this hyperscale. I do get it, right? I'm just saying that most of the organization, most of the customer in the world probably doesn't have the problem, It's more of maybe the telco of the world, maybe the hyperscaler of the world. Most of the rest is probably does not have those latency. Again, there is a budget. You can't go crazy, right? But inside that budget of the latency, you should be more than fine.
Well, I'm going to leave it at that. I thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been a great show. And this is a hard topic. Like I get nervous whenever we talk about service mesh because if it turns into a product pitch and we don't really understand the problems in the background and stuff, it gets to be a little weird. And we didn't do that, and you didn't do that, and this was great. So I'm excited. Yeah. I'm excited to have this one on the books, so that people can learn, especially about ambient. So I'm definitely going to spend some time watching some of the videos, and reading that ebook. So thank you for that.
Same here. Gonna download that ebook.
Yeah. So everyone watching, if you're still here, thank you so much for your questions. And there's a bunch of resources for everything from Solo.io, Ambient Mesh, Istio. All the links are in the description, so I'm not going to repeat them all. And I thank you for. Okay. My producer / wife is giving me tips. So thanks for being here. So by the way, let's remind people this is going to be a podcast. So if you missed it, you can always watch this show. If you want all of my ums and the background noise taken out and a refined experience, this will be a podcast in about a month. You can find, again, the links below or above me in the video. You can see those links up there. And go learn some ambient mesh. Like I feel like that's the summary of this is give it, if you tried it before ambient mesh was a thing, give Istio a shot. Check out Solo's other stuff, and it's good. It's magic. I'm not going to say it's magic. That's a bad word, but it's good stuff. So thanks again so much for being here, everyone. We will be live again next week, as always, on Thursdays. Next week will be just me hanging out, talking about my courses and answering your course questions. Those shows last forever. They're like 2.5 hour shows. I don't know why I do that to myself. But after that, we've got like all the things we got coming up. We got CodeFresh coming. Dan Garfield's going to be here next month. We've got Ufizzy, which is a preview environment solution for spinning up clusters on the fly to show you all that stuff in your PR and then tearing it down when you're done. That's Ufizzy. Josh is going to be here. We got Ken Collins. He's going to talk about AWS Lambda. He's a serverless hero at AWS. So we've got cool stuff happening this month, next month. Come back and join us. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.